Imagine standing in a room dripping with prestige, crystal chandeliers casting light across rows of medals and crisp uniforms, only to have your own father, a man revered in Washington's elite circles, call you a nobody in front of a 3-star admiral. That's the gut punch Abigail Harper felt at her sister Lenora's promotion ceremony at Fort Belvoir. The words didn't just sting, they shattered something deep inside her. At 32, Abigail was no stranger to being invisible in her family's eyes, but this public dismissal, delivered with a cold smile, was a wound that would change everything. This is the story of how a woman labeled a nobody built an empire, outsmarted her betrayers, and redefined what legacy means. Stick with us, because Abigail's journey is one you won't believe until you hear the end. If you're already hooked, hit that like button, drop a comment about a time you were underestimated, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of grit and triumph. The air at Fort Belvoir's Officers' Club was thick with the scent of polished oak, cigar smoke, and ambition. The room buzzed with the clink of glasses and the low hum of power deals being whispered among the Navy's elite. Abigail stood in a simple black dress, an island of civilian quiet amid a sea of starched uniforms. Her sister, Lenora Harper, newly promoted to lieutenant commander, glowed at the center of it all, her smile as sharp as a dress sword. Their father, Dr. Cornelius Harper, a defense strategist whose name opened Pentagon doors, took the podium. His voice, smooth as a diplomat's, lauded Lenora as the future of naval intelligence, a prodigy destined to shape global policy. The crowd nodded, entranced. Then Admiral Grayson, a grizzled family friend with 3 stars on his shoulder, leaned in with a chuckle. "Cornelius, what about your other daughter? Heard she's a sailor too." The room turned to Abigail, standing in the corner, clutching a glass of tonic water like a lifeline. Cornelius's smile tightened, a flicker of disdain crossing his face. "Abigail," he said, loud enough for every ear to catch. "She's just a logistics officer. A nobody who moves crates." The word nobody landed like a grenade, the silence that followed broken only by a few awkward chuckles. Abigail's heart didn't break, it hardened. Her mother, Dr. Eleanor Harper, a neurosurgeon with a colder touch than her scalpel, glanced at her with irritation, not at the insult, but at Cornelius's breach of decorum. No one defended Abigail. The crowd's eyes slid away, dismissing her as irrelevant. She set her glass down with a soft click, her spine rigid from years of Navy discipline, and walked out into the Virginia night. The cold air hit her like a slap, but it was cleaner than the stifling pretense inside. As she crossed the Potomac River Bridge, the Jefferson Memorial glowing faintly behind her, Abigail vowed she'd never be a footnote again. Her old Jeep's engine growled as she drove, the word nobody echoing like a taunt. It wasn't new. Her family had always seen her as a shadow to Lenora's brilliance. But this time it was public, a declaration of war. Abigail's mind raced, not with tears but with a clarity sharper than any blade. She'd spent her life in a Georgetown mansion that felt like a museum, where her tech projects, a drone that won a high school competition, were brushed off as trivial. Lenora's essays on naval strategy earned lavish praise, while Abigail's dreams were met with distracted pats. That night at Fort Belvoir wasn't the wound. It was the moment she realized she'd been bleeding for years. As she pulled into the dark driveway of her childhood home, its perfect brick facade mocking her, Abigail knew she'd have to build something undeniable, something her family couldn't ignore. The question was, how far would she go to prove them wrong? And what would it cost? The Georgetown mansion loomed like a monument to perfection, its red brick walls and manicured lawn hiding a colder truth. Abigail Harper grew up in a house where love was a transaction, doled out in proportion to achievement. Her sister, Lenora, was the family's crown jewel, a prodigy whose every word sparkled with promise. At the dinner table, their father, Dr. Cornelius Harper, would dissect naval tactics with Lenora, their voices weaving a tapestry of strategy that left no room for Abigail. She tried to join in, her teenage voice trembling with pride over a coding project, a robotic arm that won a regional science fair. "Dad, I optimized its grip by 15%, she'd say, eyes bright. Cornelius would offer a thin smile, his gaze already drifting back to Lenora. "That's nice, sweetheart," he'd mutter. "Lenora, Tell me about your paper on cyber warfare." Abigail's victories dissolved unnoticed into the polished mahogany. Her mother, Dr. Eleanor Harper, was no warmer. A neurosurgeon whose precision in the operating room never extended to her daughter's heart. Eleanor saw Abigail's passions as distractions from the family's grand narrative. When Abigail was 15, she spent weeks planning a birthday party, dreaming of a simple cake and laughter. But when a congressman's gala coincided with the date, her parents canceled without hesitation. "Abigail, don't be childish," Eleanor snapped as Abigail sobbed in the kitchen. "Lenora's internship at the Naval Academy matters more than your little party." The words carved a scar, one of many that mapped Abigail's soul. Each dismissal, her drone, her birthday, her voice, piled like stones, building a wall between her and the family she desperately wanted to belong to. Yet those wounds were also her forge. Every slight sharpened her resolve, whispering that she'd have to carve her own place in the world. The memory of Fort Belvoir's humiliation, where Cornelius called her a nobody before the Navy's elite, wasn't a new cut. It was the final twist of a knife that had been turning for years. Driving away from that glittering hall, Abigail's mind flashed back to a moment at 17, when she'd overheard her parents debating her future. "She's not like Lenora," Eleanor had said, her voice clinical. "She's ordinary." Cornelius agreed, his tone heavy with disappointment. "No strategic value." Those words burned into Abigail's core, fueling a fire she didn't yet know how to wield. She wasn't ordinary, she was unseen, and that was a different kind of power. As her jeep rumbled through Georgetown's quiet streets, the mansion's dark windows stared back, unyielding. Abigail realized her family's legacy wasn't one of love, but of calculation. Lenora's acceptance to the Naval Academy had been celebrated with a gala, champagne toasts echoing through the house. Abigail's decision to enlist in the Navy, inspired by a history teacher who said, "Logistics wins wars, not just admirals," was met with silence. She'd left her enlistment letter on Cornelius's desk, hoping for a spark of pride. Instead, he summoned her to his study, his voice low with fury. "You've shamed us, Abigail." "Enlisting? Like a common sailor." The rejection wasn't just personal. It was a verdict that she'd never be enough. But as she parked her jeep, the Fort Belvoir moment still raw, Abigail felt a shift. Those invisible scars weren't weaknesses. They were battle lines. She wasn't running from her family's shadow anymore. She was stepping into a fight to redefine it. What would it take to prove them wrong? Could Abigail build something so undeniable that even Cornelius's cold gaze would falter? The answer lay somewhere beyond the mansion's sterile walls, in a world where merit, not lineage, defined worth. As she stared at the house, its perfection a lie, a dangerous question took root. What if she didn't just want to escape their judgment? What if she wanted to own it? The Navy was waiting, a crucible that would test her in ways her family never could. And in that test, Abigail would find the first sparks of an empire that would one day bring them to their knees. The humid air of Camp Lejeune hit Abigail Harper like a fist, thick with the tang of salt marsh and the relentless bark of drill instructors. At 18, she stepped off the bus into a world that didn't care about the Georgetown mansion or her father's Pentagon connections. Here, in the North Carolina heat, Abigail wasn't a Harper. She was a recruit, a blank slate judged only by her ability to endure. The memory of Fort Belvoir, where Dr. Cornelius Harper branded her a nobody before a glittering crowd, still burned. But Camp Lejeune was her chance to rewrite that script. The Navy's training grounds were a forge, and Abigail was ready to be shaped. As she stood in formation, sweat soaking her uniform, she felt the weight of her family's dismissal lift. For the first time, she wasn't invisible, she was a sailor, and her worth would be measured in sweat and steel. The training was brutal, a relentless gauntlet of physical and mental trials. Abigail ran until her lungs screamed, her boots pounding the asphalt in perfect rhythm with her squad. She hauled gear through obstacle courses, her muscles burning, and learned to disassemble a rifle blindfolded, her fingers steady despite the chaos. Drill instructors screamed, their voices a constant storm, but it was an honest pain, unlike the quiet venom of her parents' neglect. At night, in the barracks, she'd lie awake, the ache in her body a reminder that she was alive, not a shadow in Lenora's orbit. One evening, A drill instructor caught her repairing a squad mate's jammed gear with a makeshift tool she'd crafted. "Harper, you've got grit," he grunted, a rare nod of respect. That moment, small but electric, lit a fire. She was being seen, not for her name, but for her actions. Camp Lejeune stripped away the Harper legacy, layer by layer. Abigail's long hair, once a point of pride, fell to the floor in a forgotten pile, just like her family's expectations. She didn't need their approval here. The Navy demanded performance, and Abigail delivered. She aced navigation drills, her mind sharp from years of solving problems her family ignored. Coding algorithms, building drones. One grueling night, during a simulated rescue op, her squad was lost in a swamp. While others panicked, Abigail's calm precision led them out. Using stars and a mental map of the terrain, her squad mates started calling her Compass, a nickname that felt more like home than her Georgetown address ever had. Each success was a brick in the foundation of a new Abigail, one forged in discipline and defiance. Yet the scars from her childhood lingered, whispering doubts in the quiet moments. She remembered her 15th birthday, canceled for a congressman's gala, her mother's sharp words, "Don't be childish, Abigail." At Lejeune, those memories fueled her. Every push-up, every mile, was a rebellion against the idea that she was ordinary. The Navy didn't care about Lenora's Naval Academy pedigree or Cornelius's influence. It cared if Abigail could carry her weight, and she could better than most. By the time she earned her Navy insignia, she wasn't just a sailor. She was a force, tempered by fire and ready for a real battlefield. The question wasn't whether she could survive. It was whether the world was ready for what she'd become. As Abigail stood at graduation, her uniform crisp, her eyes forward, she felt a quiet power settle in her bones. Camp Lejeune had given her something her family never could, a mirror to see her own strength. But the true test was coming, not in the controlled chaos of training, but in the deadly unpredictability of Kandahar. Could Abigail carry this resolve into a war zone, where lives hung on her decisions? The Navy had forged her, but the desert would demand everything. Her instincts, her courage, and the lessons of a lifetime spent unseen. One thing was certain. The girl who'd walked out of Fort Belvoir, head high, wasn't just escaping her past. She was marching toward a destiny that would shake the foundations of her family's empire. The Kandahar sun scorched the earth, turning the air into a shimmering haze of dust and heat. Abigail Harper, now a Navy logistics specialist, stood in the heart of Afghanistan's war zone, where every decision carried the weight of life and death. The memory of Camp Lejeune's grueling drills felt distant, but the discipline it forged pulsed through her veins. Far from the polished halls of Fort Belvoir, where her father dismissed her as a nobody, Kandahar was a proving ground where only competence mattered. Abigail's world was now convoy routes, supply manifests, and the constant hum of danger. The desert didn't care about her sister Lenora's Naval Academy laurels or her parents' Georgetown prestige. It demanded precision, and Abigail was ready to deliver. One wrong call could end lives, and she felt the stakes in every bead of sweat down her back. Her job wasn't glamorous. No medals for ensuring water, ammo, and medical supplies reached forward operating bases (FOBs). But Abigail knew logistics was the heartbeat of war. She mapped routes through IED-infested roads, her mind a steel trap of calculations and instincts honed by years of being underestimated. One moonless night, she prepared a convoy for FOB Jericho, a remote outpost desperate for supplies. The intelligence report cleared the main route, but something gnawed at her, a prickle of unease, like a shadow moving in the dark. She pored over maps, tracing a longer, rugged path through a dried riverbed. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Bryce, raised an eyebrow. "Harper, this adds an hour. You sure?" Abigail's voice was steady, her gut screaming louder than doubt. "Yes, sir. It's the safer bet." She staked her reputation on it. The convoy rolled out, tires crunching over the uneven terrain. Abigail rode shotgun, eyes scanning the horizon, her heart pounding with the weight of her choice. The next morning, a report crackled over the radio. A massive IED had been found on the main route, timed to detonate exactly when their trucks would have passed. Her call had saved 12 sailors. No ceremony followed, no commendation pinned to her chest, just quiet nods from her team. their eyes saying what words couldn't. "Compass strikes again," one whispered, clapping her shoulder. That moment, raw and unspoken, was worth more than any medal her father could have framed. It was proof. Abigail wasn't a nobody. She was the difference between life and death. Kandahar's relentless pressure sharpened her. She learned to read the desert's subtle cues. The way dust settled on a road, the flicker of movement in the hills. Every convoy was a high-stakes chess game, and Abigail played to win. But the isolation of war brought her family's rejection into stark relief. During her year-long deployment, a single email arrived, not from her parents but from Lenora. "Abigail, Dad needs a flag flown over a FOB for a donor's gift. Can you send one?" No mention of her safety, no trace of care, just a transactional demand for a prop to fuel their DC image. Sitting in a dusty tent, the distant thump of mortars echoing, Abigail deleted the email. Her war wasn't their story to exploit. Those months in Kandahar weren't just about survival, they were a revelation. Abigail's decisions, born from grit and instinct, saved lives where grand strategies meant nothing without supplies. Her family saw logistics as beneath them, but here, it was everything. As her deployment ended, she didn't return to Georgetown's cold embrace. She drove north to Philadelphia, a city as tough as she was, carrying a vision forged in the desert. The girl who'd walked out of Fort Belvoir was gone. In her place was a woman ready to build an empire from the lessons of war. But could she turn that vision into reality in a world that still saw her as a nobody? The answer lay in a gritty warehouse, where her next battle, against doubt, solitude, and her family's shadow, would begin. The Philadelphia warehouse smelled of rust and damp concrete, a far cry from the sterile Georgetown mansion where Abigail Harper had been raised. At 26, fresh from her Kandahar deployment, she stood in the cavernous space, its single flickering bulb casting long shadows across the cracked floor. This was no officers' club at Fort Belvoir, where her father's dismissal, "Nobody," still echoed. This was her battlefield now, a gritty sanctuary where she'd build Sentinel systems, a logistics platform born from the chaos of war. Every convoy route she'd mapped, every life-saving call in the desert, had taught her one truth. Logistics wasn't just support, it was power. Abigail wasn't here to play small. She was here to redefine what her family could never see. But as she unpacked her laptop, doubt crept in like the cold seeping through the walls. Could a Navy logistics specialist, dismissed as ordinary, really challenge the world? Her life shrank to the warehouse's four walls, a monastic existence fueled by instant noodles and bitter coffee from a stained pot. The hum of freight trains outside was her only companion, their rumble a reminder of the supply lines she'd mastered in Kandahar. Sentinel systems wasn't just code. It was Abigail's war translated into algorithms, a secure, intuitive system to streamline military logistics. She poured her soul into it, her fingers flying over the keyboard, each line of code a defiance of her family's verdict. A dog-eared copy of General and Dunwoody's memoir sat on her desk, its words her gospel. Logistics is the lifeblood of the force. In the desert, she'd saved lives with split-second decisions. Here she'd save futures with precision and vision. But the solitude was crushing, and the silence from the defense industry was deafening. Abigail sent hundreds of cold emails, her proposals like flares shot into a void. Most sank without a trace, echoing the dismissal she'd faced at home. Her drone projects ignored, her birthday canceled. Yet she kept coding, kept pitching, driven by a fire that refused to flicker out. One sleepless night, as rain battered the warehouse roof, she stumbled across a defense contractor's forum post seeking innovative logistics solutions. Her heart raced. This was her shot. She crafted a pitch sharper than a Kandahar convoy plan, her words carrying the weight of every near miss in the desert. She hit send, her breath catching, knowing this could be the spark to ignite her dream or another rejection to haunt her. Days later, her phone buzzed with a Pennsylvania area code. A small firm, Triton Logistics, wanted a demo. Hope, fragile but fierce, surged through her. She packed her laptop, grabbed a stale protein bar, and drove through the night, her Jeep cutting through fog on the turnpike. In a drab office park, she faced a room of skeptical executives, their faces as unyielding as her father's. But one man stood out. Gideon Holt, a former SEAL with a scar across his jaw and eyes that saw past her pitch to the woman who'd built it. "Harper," he said after her demo, his voice low and certain. "You ran a resupply for us in Kandahar, 2013. Got us ammo when we were pinned down. You're the real deal." The room shifted. Triton signed on, and Gideon offered to connect her with bigger players. For the first time, Abigail felt seen. Not as a Harper, but as a force. That moment in the warehouse, with Gideon's words echoing, wasn't just a contract. It was a lifeline. Sentinel Systems was no longer a dream. It was a reality, built from her sweat and scars. But as her company took its first steps, a darker challenge loomed. Her family, drowning in debt, would soon see her success not as pride but as a tool to exploit. Could Abigail protect her empire from the very people who'd called her a nobody? The warehouse, once a lonely refuge, was about to become a war room, and Abigail was ready to fight, not just for her company, but for the legacy she'd forge on her own terms. The Philadelphia warehouse buzzed with new life, its once silent corners now humming with servers and the faint clatter of Abigail Harper's keyboard. Sentinel Systems was no longer a dream scratched out in solitude. It was a rising star, with Triton Logistics contract fueling its growth. Abigail, at 28, felt the weight of her creation, built from Kandahar's lessons and Camp Lejeune's grit. The memory of Fort Belvoir, where her father, Dr. Cornelius Harper, branded her a nobody, was a distant sting, but it still drove her. She wasn't just building a company, she was proving a point. Yet, as Sentinel Systems gained traction, a shadow from her past crept closer. Her family, once untouchable in Georgetown's elite circles, was crumbling under debt, and they saw Abigail's success as their salvation, not hers. The battle she'd fought in the desert was nothing compared to the war about to unfold at home. The first sign came with a phone call from Cornelius, his voice booming through her phone like a general issuing orders. "Abigail, I saw your company in a trade journal. Impressive." The praise was a trap, as cold as the Georgetown dining room where her achievements were ignored. "Lenora needs a meeting with DARPA's top brass. You're in that world now, make it happen." It wasn't a request. It was a command, laced with the same disdain that had dismissed her robotics projects as a teen. Abigail's grip tightened on the phone, her silence a shield. "I'm not in a position to do that," she said, her voice steady. "Make yourself in one," he snapped, hanging up. Days later, her mother, Dr. Eleanor Harper, called, her tone syrupy with false warmth. "Darling, we're a family. Don't stand in Lenora's way." The words echoed her childhood. "Don't be childish, Abigail." They didn't want her. They wanted her connections. Then came the real blow. An email from the Defense Logistics Agency, announcing a comprehensive security audit of Sentinel Systems. Abigail's stomach dropped. This wasn't routine. It was a surgical strike, designed to gut her company. Years in the Navy had taught her to spot a setup, and this reeked of her father's influence. Gideon Holt, her ally from Triton, confirmed it over a secure line. A Pentagon official, a regular at Cornelius's golf outings, had suggested the audit. Her family wasn't just asking for favors. They were trying to break her for refusing them. The audit's demands were relentless, a flood of paperwork and code reviews meant to drown her in stress and costs. Each night, Abigail and her small team worked until dawn, her warehouse a war room lit by the glow of monitors. Failure wasn't an option. One flaw could kill Sentinel Systems. But Abigail was no stranger to pressure. In Kandahar, she'd navigated convoys through IED-laden roads. This was just another battlefield. She triple-checked every line of code, every protocol, her military discipline a fortress against the auditor's scrutiny. Gideon brought in contacts to counter whispers in D.C., while Abigail's paranoia, honed by years of being unseen, ensured no detail was overlooked. The auditors, expecting a sloppy startup, found a system as impenetrable as a battleship. After weeks of grueling scrutiny, they issued a clean report, a rare victory that echoed through the defense industry. Abigail had faced her family's power and won, but the fight wasn't over. Their desperation was a ticking bomb, and she sensed a deeper motive behind their attack, something more than pride. As she sat in the warehouse, the audit behind her, Abigail's mind raced. Her family's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was strategic, a desperate move to protect their crumbling empire. What were they hiding? A call to an old friend, a financial analyst named Clara, revealed the truth. The Harpers were drowning in debt, their Georgetown mansion mortgaged, their lifestyle a facade. Abigail realized this wasn't just about control, it was about survival. Her success was a threat to their image, and they'd stop at nothing to bend her to their will. But Abigail wasn't the girl who'd walked out of Fort Belvoir anymore. She was a strategist, and the next move was hers. Could she turn their weakness into her weapon? The answer lay in a plan so bold it would redefine the battlefield, and her family's place in it. The Georgetown mansion glowed with Christmas warmth, its windows twinkling with fairy lights, but inside, the air was thick with tension. Abigail Harper stepped into the dining room, her boots clicking on the polished hardwood, a stark contrast to the glittering holiday table set with fine china and silver. At 29, she was no longer the girl who'd fled Fort Belvoir, stung by her father's dismissal as a nobody. Sentinel Systems, her logistics empire born in a Philadelphia warehouse, had just survived a brutal Pentagon audit orchestrated by her family's influence. Now invited to this Christmas dinner, Abigail knew it wasn't a truce, it was a trap. Her parents, Dr. Cornelius and Dr. Eleanor Harper, and her sister Lenora, radiant in a velvet dress, played the part of a perfect family. But Abigail carried a secret that would shatter their facade. She owned their debts, their home, their very survival. As the scent of roasted goose and pine filled the room, she braced for the confrontation that would redefine her legacy. The dinner began with forced pleasantries, the clink of wine glasses masking the undercurrent of need. Cornelius carved the goose with patriarchal precision, while Eleanor fussed over the cranberry relish, her smile as brittle as the ice outside. Lenora, now a lieutenant commander, charmed the table with tales of her naval intelligence work, her voice a polished weapon. Abigail sat quietly, her black sweater a deliberate rejection of their opulence, her mind sharp with the intelligence she'd gathered. Through anonymous LLCs, Sterling Ventures, Horizon Medical, and Apex Consulting, she'd bought the second mortgage on this very house, her mother's medical debts, and even her father's lucrative consulting gig. Every dollar keeping their world afloat came from her, the nobody they'd dismissed. The irony was a cold, satisfying weight in her chest. After dessert, Cornelius cleared his throat, his smile a calculated mask. "Abigail, we're so proud of Sentinel Systems," he began, his voice dripping with false warmth. "But the family's hit a rough patch, temporary of course. With your success, we thought you could help out." Eleanor nodded, her eyes glinting with expectation, while Lenora's gaze flickered with unease. This was it, the moment they thought they'd reel her back into their orbit. Abigail set her fork down, the soft clink echoing like a gunshot. She reached into her satchel and placed a sleek black folder on the table, its weight heavier than the feast. "I know about your rough patch," she said, her voice calm but cutting. "I know everything." She slid the first document toward Cornelius. "This is the deed to this house. Sterling Ventures LLC, my company, owns it." Cornelius's face paled, his fork frozen mid-air. Abigail didn't pause. She turned to Eleanor, sliding another paper. "Your heart conditions bills? Horizon Medical, another of my companies, bought them. I've been paying for your care." Eleanor's hand trembled, her composure cracking. Finally, Abigail pushed the last document to her father. "And your consulting contract with Apex Consulting? That's me too. Every cent you've spent came from me." The dining room fell silent, a suffocating void where their pride used to be. Lenora stammered, "Abigail, what are you doing?" Abigail stood, her presence commanding the room. "You called me a nobody," she said, her voice ablade. "But this nobody owns your world. Competence, not legacy, is everything." The words hung, stripping away their power, leaving only the wreckage of their hypocrisy. She walked out, the Christmas lights blurring in the cold night air, her heart steady but hollow. This wasn't revenge. It was justice, a reckoning for years of dismissal, from her cancelled birthday to Fort Belvoir's humiliation. Abigail had turned their betrayal into her triumph, but the victory felt like a wound. As she drove away, the mansion shrinking in her rear view, she knew the war wasn't over. Her family's desperation would push them to strike again, but Abigail was ready. She'd built an empire on her terms, and now she'd build a legacy that didn't need their approval. The question was, could she find peace beyond the battlefield, in a world she'd create from scratch? The Norfolk waterfront stretched before Abigail Harper. The salty Atlantic breeze a cleansing contrast to the stifling Georgetown mansion where she'd last faced her family. At 30, she stood in a new headquarters for Sentinel Systems, a sleek, open-plan office blocks from the beach, far from the shadow of Fort Belvoir's humiliation. The Christmas Confrontation, where she'd revealed her ownership of her family's debts, had severed the last ties to her past. Now, Abigail was building something bigger than revenge, a legacy of purpose. The warehouse days in Philadelphia, fueled by ramen and grit, had forged her company, but it was here, in the salt air of Virginia, that she'd find her true calling. The Athena Project, her nonprofit for female veterans, was born from her scars, a beacon for women like her, overlooked but unbreakable. As she watched the horizon, a question lingered. Could this new family fill the void her old one left behind? The Athena Project wasn't just a charity. It was a rebellion against every dismissal Abigail had endured, from her canceled 15th birthday to her father's nobody jab. Housed in a sunlit co-working space, it buzzed with laughter, coffee, and the fierce energy of women building futures. Abigail funded it with Sentinel Systems profits, offering seed capital, mentorship, and a network for female veterans to launch businesses. She mentored a former Army mechanic starting a drone repair shop, her eyes lighting up as Abigail shared coding tricks from her high school days. Another, a Marine medic, pitched a telemedicine startup, her voice steady with the confidence Abigail's support unlocked. These women weren't just entrepreneurs. They were a sisterhood, bound by shared grit and dreams her family could never understand. Her chosen family grew beyond the office. Gideon Holt, the ex-SEAL who'd seen her worth in Philadelphia, was now her business partner and anchor, his steady presence a contrast to her parents' cold calculations. Their first hire, Tessa, a whip-smart coder with a punk rock edge, brought a sibling-like spark to their team. Weekend dinners at Abigail's beachside apartment were messy, joyful affairs. Steamed crabs on newspaper, beer bottles clinking, stories of triumphs and failures shared without judgment. One night, she met Caleb, a naval engineer, while walking her dog on the beach. His quiet kindness saw her scars as strength, not flaws, and their easy laughter felt like home. This was the life she'd craved, not the sterile Georgetown dinners where her voice was ignored. Yet, even as Sentinel Systems landed major contracts and the Athena Project lifted women up, a hollow ache lingered. Victory over her family hadn't filled the void, it had exposed it. Abigail found solace in Breen Brown's words on courage, read late at night. Setting boundaries was painful but vital. The Athena Project became her answer, each success, a veteran's bakery opening, another's tech startup thriving, mending a piece of her heart. One evening, a veteran named Mara, whose logistics firm Abigail funded, hugged her, tears in her eyes. "You saw me when no one else did," she said. Abigail's throat tightened. She'd given Mara what her family never gave her, belief. This was her legacy, not in wealth or power, but in lives changed. As Norfolk's waves crashed, Abigail knew she'd won more than a war with her family. She'd built a world where worth wasn't tied to lineage. Her parents' crumbling empire, once a threat, was now a distant echo. The Athena Project's office, alive with collaboration, was her true home, its warmth a shield against the past. But one final test loomed. A call from her father, Dr. Cornelius Harper, his voice frail with an apology she'd once craved. Would it shake her hard-won peace? Or was she truly free? The answer lay in a single moment, one that would close the book on her old life and open a new chapter in the empire she'd created. Abigail Harper stood on her Norfolk balcony, the Atlantic's waves a steady rhythm against the shore, their crash a lullaby to her hard-won peace. The call from her father, Dr. Cornelius Harper, had come that evening, his voice no longer booming but broken, whispering, "I'm sorry, Abigail." Once, those words would have unraveled her, a desperate hope for the love she'd chased in Georgetown's cold halls. Now they were just sounds, empty of power to wound or heal. She'd forgiven them, not for their sake, but for hers. The Athena Project, Sentinel Systems, her chosen family of Gideon, Tessa, and Caleb. They were her legacy, built on competence and care, not the hollow prestige her parents prized. The sunset painted the sky in soft pinks, and Abigail felt a quiet freedom settle in her bones. She wasn't the nobody from Fort Belvoir. She was the architect of a community that lifted others as she'd lifted herself. Her victory wasn't their apology, it was this moment, standing whole, surrounded by the laughter of her true family inside. The war was over, and Abigail was home. What a journey, right? Abigail's story shows us what it means to rise above, to turn pain into purpose. Have you ever been underestimated like she was? Drop your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how you proved them wrong. If this hit home, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs this inspiration, and subscribe for more stories of grit and triumph. Let's keep building this community together. See you in the next video.